In order for you to understand what I'm about to share with you on who owns South Africa, you first of all have to take off your racial sentiment and also your stereotype towards my nationality as a non-South African and focus on the facts only. I repeat, keep your eyes on the fact only. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to present to you with key empirical facts based on data from the 16th century to now on who actually owns the land the South African people live on currently. But before I do that, I want you to recognize that South Africa has a sizable number of white citizens who claim equal ownership of the country. The question of how did the white people in South Africa actually own lands in a place which was already inhabited is what I'm here to discuss. Because when you look around in sub-Saharan Africa, in as much as we all had our fair share of colonial rule, you don't see any whites claiming ownership of any parcel of lands except in South Africa. So how did the white folks in South Africa actually settle there and owned lands? Ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot I'm about to shock you with. But first, do me a favor. Kindly subscribe if you haven't done that already and click on the notification bell to see all of my contents. I'm Cyrus and this is Tuntum Network in Accra, Ghana. Let's get into it. Before the 17th century, there were no white people in the land that is now called South Africa. It was all black tribes like the Sans and the Khoikhois and the indigenous tribes like that. But by the late 17th to early 18th centuries, the white settlers, commonly known as the Afrikaners or Boers, had already migrated and owned vast parcels of land in that area. How did this happen in a space of 100 years? Ladies and gentlemen, two situations made it so: colonial conquest and legalized dispossession. With a superior military formation of the Dutch settlers at the time, they had taken the lands without the approval or consent of the indigenous people and restricted the indigenous people from accessing the lands outside of their mainstays. Then from 1894 to 1913, these Dutch settlers from the Netherlands instituted a government system and used a legal process to restrict the black indigenous Africans to their native communities only, and also prohibited them from buying or renting lands outside of their designated lands. Ladies and gentlemen, in addition to that, from 1948 to 1994, the apartheid regime reinforced the segregation of lands according to race. So the black people were clustered into townships and into their villages and restricted from moving to white communities. As a result of this history, this is what now has become of South Africa. Check out these shocking but true facts, ladies and gentlemen. The white South Africans owns approximately 26.7 million hectares of privately held farmlands, which is about 72% of all privately owned farmlands in South Africa. The key word here is privately, not the entire land mass of the country, but those that are registered under companies and individuals. They own 26.7 million hectares of such lands, ladies and gentlemen. Let me put it in simplified English for you. The private farmland South African white people own in South Africa today is bigger than my country, Ghana. Ghana is 23.8 million hectares of land, and the white South Africans own 26.7 million hectares of private farmlands. The private farmlands the white people own in South Africa, which is prohibited to the public from entering without permission, are bigger than Ghana and Burkina Faso as a country. It is bigger than the land area of Togo, Benin, and Sierra Leone combined. In fact, it is bigger than many African countries. Ladies and gentlemen, it could be split into multiple countries inside South Africa like Lesotho. And let me blow your mind with this other one. The total land area of South Africa is about 122 million hectares. And the white people alone own 87.8 million hectares out of that total land size. Did you catch it, ladies and gentlemen? The white people, who are less than 8% of South Africa's population, own 87.8 million hectares of the country's 122 million hectares, which is 72% of the total land. Meaning the rest of the black, Indian, Asian, colored population of over 58 million people have only 28% of the total land to share. The rest is all either privately controlled by white farmers with ownership in perpetuity or owned as real estate. I harbor no hate against any group of people, be it white, black, brown, or whichever color. And in fact, I have white people I call friends in South Africa. But I always ask them this one question: could any African tribe go to Europe and take European lands and own them in perpetuity? Ladies and gentlemen, in perpetuity actually means forever and ever, so long as the country exists. There was no point where the indigenous people willingly sold their lands to the white people. There was no offer for sale made and no interest to buy also made. It was just taken because they could, and that's the problem. Could that ever happen under any circumstance in Europe? This is what ruffles a lot of feathers. I love my country, Ghana, and I know you love yours as well. So ask yourself, what will the tribes in your country in Africa do if 78% of their ancestral lands were owned by white settlers? What will the Ashantis do, for instance? What will the Yorubas do, the Igbos, the Fulanis, and so on? How will the situation be if this condition was not just about South Africa, but about the Gonjas in Ghana, for instance? How will they take it, ladies and gentlemen? I can therefore understand the frustration of Julius Malema and the EFF, even though I cannot relate, in the sense that with this situation, it becomes almost impossible for the people to thrive. Lands form the starting point of all wealth. This is why everyone aspires to have a place of their own. The population will continue to increase and expand, but land size will forever remain the same, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, once you lose your land, you've lost your very source of wealth. It is out of the land we have the precious minerals and crude oil and crops. It is what contains the animals and the infrastructure that we live in. Therefore, when you lose the land, you've already literally given out the potential of your precious minerals and oil and crop farming and animal farming and all of that. You've lost it. You have given up your foundation to put up the infrastructure that will generate wealth for you and your family in the future. In every society where this is the case, like with the Red Indians of America and the indigenous people of Australia and New Zealand, the local people, the indigenous people who have been conquered and have lost their lands are rendered impoverished. This is always the case. And so this explains why the white South Africans control a disproportionately large share of the country's wealth, owning around 1/3 of household wealth and holding so much of the nation's business assets, despite comprising only 8% of the population. Through military force and economic marginalization, white South Africa today dominates in everything. The black poverty ratio is 64%, whereas the poverty ratio of white South Africans is at 1%. Therefore, without any fear in my mind, ladies and gentlemen, I would dare to say this. If Trump wasn't being disingenuous, and if Ramaphosa wasn't being a coward, this should have been the discussion between them, Trump and Ramaphosa. When Trump brought up the issue of Julius Malema, Ramaphosa should have turned the question back on Trump and asked him what he will do if his homelands were taken by foreigners, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know whether he was overwhelmed by the White House or the media or the personality of Trump, but at least he could have asked Trump to put those fake photos aside of the killings of white South Africans, because it could have been randomly downloaded from the internet, even though there is a high crime rate in South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the struggle for economic freedom is not just a South African thing, but for all of Africa. South Africa is currently dealing with internal economic dispositioning, whereas the rest of sub-Saharan Africa is dealing with external economic handicaps. And we are all also dealing with internal corruption and bad leadership. At this point, solutions are desperately needed to deal with the land ownership situation in South Africa, because that is totally unacceptable. There must be reforms in South Africa. There must be land reforms. There must be a consensus building, and it must happen sooner than later. If not, one day we'll wake up to the worst news ever. Remember, these people in South Africa, I'm talking about the black people today, are the remnants of prolonged fighting for freedom and justice. So let's not wait till when the night falls. Let's act now while the sun is still up. This is for the men of understanding. I do not support chasing anyone out of Africa, no matter the color of their skin or the actions of their forefathers. I believe we can all live in peace and work side by side in spite of our differences. But we cannot do that in the absence of justice and equality. The leadership of South Africa will have to find a way to trash out the challenges with the land ownership situation in South Africa and make the country move forward. This matter must be put to rest permanently. Economic freedom must be for all. South Africa belongs to the black people and to the white people and to the Asians as well. But something must give way for a more equitable country to be formed. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, based on all the facts put forward with the lands and wealth distribution in South Africa currently, I can at this point confidently say that South Africa is owned by the white minority, even though they have a black president. For there is no successful and profitable enterprise in South Africa which doesn't have a white majority stake. From the Old Mutual to Standard Bank to Sanlam to ShopRite and Anglo Gold Ashanti, they dominate in all because of this particular history. Ladies and gentlemen, the system must be reset in South Africa to allow for an equal play field, and must be done now. Thanks for taking time to watch this episode, and let's keep pushing until all of Africa has economic independence. I'll come your way again with another one very soon. Until then, be sure to subscribe and click on the bell for more of my content. It is bye-bye for now.